Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm David. I lead the Web3 storage team on the product and business side. And I'm super stoked to be here today. And then, as Anshuman pointed out, I guess I'm the last thing. We are the last thing standing between you and lunch. So it's a ton of power. We'll try not to let it get to our heads. But yeah, I mean, it was initially pitched as a community brainstorm to us. So would love engagement from all of you all, the builders and folks doing all the hard work out there. If you have any thoughts on the topics, just raise your hand and someone will come by with a microphone if you want to add anything to the conversation. Otherwise, I'll let these two good folks introduce themselves as well.
Thanks. I'm Changwé. I'm BD at Near Protocol. We're super stoked to be here, super stoked to be on this panel as well. And like Dave said, we'll try not to eat up too much of your time before lunch.
Hi, my name is Grodzki. I am CEO of 3S Game Studio, and if you missed my previous talk, we are developers who are bringing tools for Unreal Engine for everyone else to develop their Web3 games with.
Yeah, and it's a good cast because our team works on the storage infra side of things, so things happening off chain. Changwei and the team helps with the things on chain and the infrastructure there, and then Adam is actually helping build in the space and has experienced firsthand both the highs and the lows and some of the challenges. So yeah, just to jump into things, I think really quickly, it's always useful to talk about the why of why would you do something like build a dapp for your game. And there's been a lot of great conversation this morning around that very topic, but it's hard to get to the crux of what you're looking for from your infrastructure without having that background. So maybe talking a little bit about why a gaming studio would choose Web3 technology to build their stuff on top of. I'd be curious both to hear, Adam, what attracted you to the space, and then also from Changwei, what Near specifically thinks about when trying to attract gaming studios and gamers to the chain.
I think it's Web3 has given people a very powerful vehicle in terms of not just expression of self, but also governance of data. I think specifically as well in gaming, what's also happened, it's empowered developers as well to have a new way of reaching users and consumers, as well as also empowering them as well. Traditionally, big Web2 gaming studios are very profit-focused, so you get completely drowned out in a market of indie and devs. But as Web3 has come along, there's this exciting new innovation where users can now be part of the creative process. They can also be, it's a more democratized way of gaming, not just from creation, but also from ownership, and as well as continuation of the story as well. So I think what the infra should allow for is to enable people to create without limits, and that's exactly what we believe in at Near.
I can also add that on an engineering level, because we in 3S Game Studio, we're mostly engineers. Once you get familiar with the Web3 stack, which can be quite intimidating at start, you will find out that it is actually accelerating the game development process as a whole. Because suddenly when you have this trustless network that you can get interactions with directly from the client, you solve some of the biggest issues when creating a multiplayer game. So you no longer have to secure the connection, the network on your side. You don't have a single point of failure, which is your login services that you have to run. And in general, running multiplayer games is something around 20% coding the game itself, and 80% is coding the backend, the services. So when you start using Web3 stack, so it goes for IPFS, blockchain, and anything else that goes into it, you suddenly don't have to worry about it. And that speeds up the development of many features of a game. So like trading items in between users, you don't even have to implement that. If you implement the NFT stack, either if it's ERC 721 or 1155 or any other of the newer standards, you suddenly are compatible with external exchanges that allow you to trade items in between players directly, let's say on OpenSea. And even though OpenSea is taking a revenue cut on all the trades, it's still a lot cheaper, even for the end user to use, than, for example, Steam.
Awesome. Yeah, that's actually a really, really powerful story, I think, because when gaming started taking off within Web3, I think a lot of folks were looking at reasons why the end users themselves, the players, would want to use Web3 technologies. And, you saw things like play to earn come up and, NFTs and things like that. And a lot of that, there's something there, but equally as powerful as an accelerant is if you can make the lives of the development studios and the engineers easier. An NFT could be cool to take from one universe to another, but it's not necessarily universal that like one game that has a sword and you owning that translates to all other games out there. So there's still stuff to figure out on that level. But if you make the developer's life easier by plugging into the NFT ecosystem because all the tooling is there, and now you don't have to focus so much on specifically what you need to build to enable items in your games and things like that, that's equally as powerful. So I love that example.
And I think also being able to allow developers to express themselves in different coding languages. So I think traditionally, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the games were probably coded in C++ and built on Unity. Right now, I think that's 80% of the market. But now we obviously have, on Near we have Rust, we have Solidity environments, we have Substrate and Octopus. So we also have a JavaScript SDK. So that allows for millions more developers in a coding language that they already understand to come in and develop without having that barrier to entry. So I think it's also removing some of those hurdles, because then with experimentation comes the understanding of what business models might work. You mentioned obviously things like play to earn, and we've seen examples like Axie and Steppen that have had great success, initial success, but haven't been sustainable business models. But with time and with experimentation, I think that will come, and we need more devs and more users to understand what is good and what is sustainable in the long term.
Yeah, exactly. The same thing happened to gaming in general. With quantities, eventually comes quality. So the more developers get their hands onto the technology and it's being more accessible throughout the years, more quality products will rise up and people will use them because they like using them, not because someone has really good monetization plan. Right, so the same happened to like the rise of the battle royale games. Suddenly there were like hundreds of them competing on the market, and in the end you got like just a handful of them that were simply the best. And the same is going to happen with Web3 and the rise of all the SDKs and the tools that are being accessible to indie developers is going to drive this revolution soon. So there's a lot of early products that we've seen on the market that we're focusing on how to sell to as much people as you can see. And even a very bad implementations from the hands of the AAA developers like the Quartz, which was quite a failure. But yeah, once the indie developers get their hands on Web3 stack, we will see something really amazing coming in the near future.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point that there are parallels to how things look like in history. And maybe to just wrap up the why Web3 part of this conversation, I think two other things that come to mind are how Steam and other marketplaces made it a lot easier to go to market with your game. And now folks are looking at trying to make that model more decentralized to make sure that more of the take ends up in the creator's hands. And something like that would be really powerful, as well as plugging into the entire identity ecosystem within Web3 and being able to not have to deal with different gates and trying to get critical adoption of whatever identity primitive you're using for your specific game. There's already a network out there that you can plug into.
Oh, go ahead.
Exactly. Like we have an example, which is very early. I think it was like yesterday or 2 days ago that Apple announced that they do allow NFTs and crypto projects, but they must use the Apple payments, which basically is gatekeeping all the payments and saying that we take 30% from everything, which is absurd. Like there's no real reason. There's no like technological overhaul that they need this 30% for to maintain those applications. And I'm just wondering how they're going to approach all the mobile wallets that are out there, which are Web3 applications. They are games on their store. They do transfer value, so they basically are doing purchases and sales. but they're not using their payment method at all. So how are they going to approach that? And this is a big issue with centralized services like Steam and other big players, that they can just cut you off at any moment for any reason, and the reason is usually money.
And they do cut you. That's usually the mechanism that they use. You know, they're apps fighting back against Apple's model by letting users go into a separate URL and like sign up for a subscription that way and bring that to the app to try and get around it. Got some of these apps deplatformed and things like that. That's usually the mechanism they use.
And I think it's pertinent, the point that you guys actually raised in terms of that fractionalization and that centralization, because to that point, in terms of actually bringing on board users, you do have to have some sort of Web 2 to Web 3 hybrid, at least to allow some sort of initial injection. I mean, I spoke about lowering the barriers for developers, but there's also lowering the barriers for users as well. So for example, on Near, we have email-like wallet addresses where it's your name.near, and you can custody your assets within your wallet. You can also custody tokens. And that also happens with the back end. We have SDKs, for example, OP Games, are building on Near. Play Ember is also an amazing example of this, where they basically just take the integration and everything happens on the back end. So you as a user pretty much don't realize that you're in a Web3 kind of world. And to the point on Apple, I suppose, for example, on Near, on every smart contract that executes, 30% of that reward goes straight to the developer for that smart contract execution. So it's things like that, rewarding and incentivizing the devs as well, that will hopefully start to bring people away from the dominant market forces like the Apple stores and the Play stores, but there still also needs to be a hybrid because there are still billions of users on those stores. So it's about finding a way that can work for both.
Exactly, and Web3 as a technology, it should be convenience. It should be just convenience for the developers, because there is a clear benefit for using this stack unless you are forcing it.
That's a really good segue into the next part of the conversation. So games are just data floating around the network, and some of that data is on-chain, some of it's off-chain, and the way that you can make someone play a fun game is to make that experience really good of how that data moves around. Yeah, I'd love to talk about maybe starting with what's unique about gaming data and what are the needs of gaming data that are pretty specific to gaming in terms of size and latency and needs there, and then we can kind of talk about challenges that maybe we faced in getting games implemented on the Web3 stack, how we're closing those, and even some of the advantages that the Web3 stack inherently has from an infrastructure perspective. So yeah, maybe Adam, if you want to talk a little bit about what makes gaming data unique, or what are kind of the parameters there.
Yep, sure. So one of the approaches you can go is to keep everything on chain, of course, which is a very expensive approach, usually even for the users. And there comes the problem of data that's being constantly changed. So you cannot run the entire backend on chain because you have just basic stats, life, stamina, other parameters that have to be running live on the server directly without checking with the blockchain itself. But then you have certain data that you are storing permanently and changing it, like let's say experience points, that is reasonable to hold on chain. But with IPFS, what you can do is you can hold on chain just the CID, and then you can mutate the data as goes in the IPFS stack. And I think one of the coolest technologies out there for that right now is the IPNS, which allows you to make this incremental stack, and you can even backtrack and see the changes as they goes. And this is really useful for, first of all, of course, tracking the progress of a character, or like a progress of ownership of an item, so you can always backtrack who was the previous owner. But also you can do something that we are talking about in my previous panel, that you can make patching solution, where you have actual pack files being downloaded from IPFS, and you can do incremental updates to the game while using the Web3 stack.
I'm not the most super technical person.
Fooled me.
But I will definitely say that it's a challenge that I suppose everybody is trying to solve as well, particularly with partnerships with cloud services, obviously with IPFS, as you just mentioned. So it's something that we're working closely with our partners on as well in terms of how do we get that data storage in a way that is also beneficial to our developers as well as our users, and how is it also implemented in a way that is seamless as well, without it having to be a massive chore and a massive hurdle as well for people to overcome.
Yeah, and I think you hit some trade-offs when you think about the structure of how, and both on-chain and off-chain data, but how that's written, how conflicts are resolved, and all that sort of thing. And historically, while the technology was more nascent and fewer nodes existed and things like that, like sometimes it took a lot longer for things to resolve when you read off like the IPFS network or on a blockchain. You try to, like, before services existed that were could tell you pretty quickly like what the truth was. Like you might have some latency doing reads off there, and we see services stepping in to kind of bridge that gap. So just a quick anecdote from our experience at Web3 Storage. We started out by running a bunch of IPFS nodes in the cloud, a bunch of Kubo nodes, and that worked for a while. Once we hit a certain amount of scale, it really, like, the performance degraded, and a lot of times across the whole network, we were the only ones who had that data and were broadcasting it to the network. So we had to go ahead and do a few things. So one was we wrote a new implementation of IPFS called Elastic IPFS that was designed for this sort of scale, and used actually centralized cloud providers from a physical storage standpoint, because they're really good at their jobs. With the snap of your fingers, you can spin up more storage or more bandwidth and things like that, or more compute, and that changed the game for us. And instead of always putting out fires mode, like, we were serving the data very reliably. And then there was another gap from going from that and serving it quickly, where we did some work with launching our own gateway and having users who are storing their data with us have that data available on edge servers. So if most folks are reading data off of the IPFS network out of a gateway, you can use ours if you're storing data with us and get it at CDN level speed. So it's techniques like that once you bridge that initial gap, you start to lean into some of actually the ways that technology like IPFS wins. Content IDs on IPFS are insanely cacheable. It doesn't matter who's requesting that and from like what origin or what service. If you are using that same content ID, it's available to everyone who's looking for it, and you start to be able to take advantage of those sorts of things.
And that's a great story, because I mean, through that came your own innovation and your own experimentation, how you could expand that storage and how you could make it more accessible and readable and usable as well. And of course, that's kind of to the point that I just made earlier about experimentation within Web3, and it allows for this type of ongoing learning, which it could be expanded by rapidity because there are significantly lower barriers to hurdles for more people to get in. So, really cool.
Yeah, I can say from my experience that it does make a difference what gateway you're using for IPFS. Like the speed of accessibility of the data does differ, and I can say that by default we are using Web3 storage due to reasons that you mentioned, that you are just caching data and making it more accessible. There's just a lot of technical details that goes into it, but it makes it a lot more convenient. But still, even if you are using a gateway that is slower and you are hitting some of the limitations that you have with IPFS, making games in general is hard. And you have to be mindful about everything that you are doing as an engineer when making a game. And same goes with Web 2 and Web 3 development. You just have to be mindful about what you are loading when and how much in advance you have to think about it. But it doesn't really change the way that you're building the games if you are shifting from the Web 2 stack to the Web 3 stack, really.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I mean, I would also add, though, at the same time, ideally it's as easy as possible, right? Like, the fewer headaches, the better. So I guess that's what we're all working towards. Yeah, and I guess maybe from Adam, I'd love to hear if you've ever faced trade-offs in thinking about using like Web3 versus Web2 solutions. Gateways, for instance, are a little bit of a trade-off where you're using some centralized infrastructure that could go down. You could swap it out with another gateway. So there is still Web3-ness about it. And all the data is still verifiable through the content ID. But I think that's an example of a really smart trade-off that folks make. I'm wondering if you've encountered anything else when it comes to the infrastructure.
I mean, yes, of course. We did find some hardships when developing Web3 applications, especially for external clients. But usually the actual drawbacks that we were facing is that because part of the stack was a bit forced into the solution instead of being used where it actually makes sense. Because it doesn't make sense everywhere. It doesn't make sense for every product and every solution. But if you plan ahead of how you are using IPFS in your game, then you don't really run into any blockades. Actually, it's even better for multiplayer games, because when you're replicating data in between the server and the clients, you hit certain bandwidth limitations when it comes down to how much bytes you can send back and forth. And it's not a limitation for the client, it's the limitation for the server, because when you are updating 100 clients, each client gets just a position of 100 other clients, right? Yeah, but the server needs to send this 100 clients location to 100 players, and then we have 10,000 replications, right? So if you are replicating something that is very complex, and you can, instead of replicating the classes, locations, transforms, and everything that comes into this complicated structure, you can replicate just the CID. And the CID is referring to a JSON that holds this structure. Then you have less load on the server itself, and the clients can update themselves. So they are directly connected to the backend, and this way you can offload the server a bit, and you can actually get more clients into a multiplayer game with this. So there are drawbacks when it comes down to how fast you can fetch and load the data, but usually in games, it's not really important to load data in a fraction of a second. You have the time to load it asynchronously and load it and show it. Or as a good game designer, you have the time in the lobby, for example, to preload everything and just cache it on the drive of the client and then flush it out once the session is over.
I was just going to say, actually, I think part of the reason as well why maybe there's been quite a bit of difficulty for Web3 games in terms of general traction as well is not just because of the technical hurdles, but also some studios kind of maybe feel the need to overutilize certain blockchain elements into a game when there doesn't necessarily need to be, which then also can lead to technical challenges and technical
they're usually like approaches saying, oh yeah, we're building this and this game with Web3. I'm like, okay, how are you using the blockchain for it? I don't know. You tell us.
Yeah, and that in itself obviously has points where you hit difficulties, you hit walls, but if you maybe try to reinvent that process to actually understand what elements of a game necessarily can be used in a blockchain applicable way, so items, collectibles, things that are obviously transferable in a marketplace that you can give ownership rights, pass it to, then you can start to maybe overcome some technical challenges, storage hurdles, etc. But you shouldn't have to shoehorn blockchain into a game. You should think of the development process in a different way.
Totally, and I was just going to add that it on the off-chain side of things, it's our end of the bargain, folks like Web3 Storage and other service providers, or even people working on the core IPFS implementations, to make it easy enough to use and performant enough so folks can do a lot of the stuff off-chain, but still extend those guarantees that you get on-chain by being able to use IPFS CIDs in terms of linking the on-chain and off-chain components. So yeah, I mean, it is kind of our goal to, anytime someone doesn't want to run their own IPFS node and manage that infrastructure, there are tons of advantages to doing that in some circumstances, but still, just like we see with cloud services today, a lot of times you don't want to have to run that stuff yourself. We tried to make it really, really easy for folks to be able to just rely on us.
And I think the more partners that you have in the space, obviously the better. Like, we live in a decentralized world. We have many different cloud storage solutions. So I think it's also providing the option, like you said, to developers and to users as well when they're initially building out that stack.
Cool, and maybe this can be the last question, but I would love to hear if there's anything y'all are either working on yourselves or see in the space that gets you really excited about the future in terms of bringing gaming to Web3. And I have an example I can start with if buy y'all some time to think about it a little bit. But for us at Web3 Storage, we're super excited about making all our APIs authorization mechanism via UCANs. So you've heard UCANs mentioned a little bit this morning, but it's a way that a service can verify that through a chain of signatures in the token, the auth token, that it's actually that person requesting that service to be invoked. And then the other really cool thing about it is you can delegate permissions to other actors with a key pair to then interact with your service directly on your behalf. So you end up in this situation. It's similar to the topic earlier about once you have solved some of the base layers of fundamental needs of developers like reliability and speed, you can get to touching on other things Web3 storage or Web3 just does better. By being able to delegate UCAN tokens to other actors and have them interact with your service directly, you create a much more efficient data pipeline to getting data stored and retrieved through the web. So you no longer have to stand up a backend just to proxy data into the service that you're uploading to. Your user, even sometimes the end user, can directly upload to Web3 storage themselves, saving a ton of bandwidth and speed and that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted to mention. That currently we can communicate with IPFS directly from the clients and fetch any data, but when it comes down to uploading to IPFS, we have to relay it through the servers because of the security issues. Because if you are shipping the game with the access token, then someone can get this access token out of the source code of the game, and then he can use it in malicious way and just upload an infinite amount of information into your service. So UCANs are the missing link that we are waiting for to actually offload all the communication with IPFS onto the clients. So it will be a two-way communication directly with the Web3 stack, which means that it will even more offload on the dedicated servers, which means that we can be able to build a lot easier, a lot bigger games in future.
I think from a foundation protocol perspective, we have to also be honest and say that we're obviously still right at the start of this amazing, innovative, and emerging technology. Some of the OGs might disagree with me there, but definitely from our perspective, we also have to be honest in terms of the fact that we're not yet at the size of maybe an immutable or a Polygon, and we're working towards that. But that's also extremely exciting for us because there's so much opportunity in this space. And really what we want to do from Near's perspective is to, again, remove those barriers, allow people to create without limits, play without limits, allow people to engage in a way that feels convenient and seamless, as well as provide the tools necessary and the gateways also necessary for people to come on board and feel comfortable to do that. So there's a huge amount of space here for development. There's a huge amount for growth as well. We talk about the Apple Play Store and obviously Apple iOS Store and the Google Play Store. And definitely in a future where they have millions and billions of users, we're making splashes in Web3 with hundreds of thousands of users or tens of thousands of users, which is actually very encouraging because it shows that there is still a way to go for us to hit that market and hit that market maturity. So extremely excited about what the future holds for Web3 and how we as well can enable that and enable the future of gaming.
Awesome. Well, I see the limited power I had to stop y'all from eating lunch has been violated. So we can wrap up here. Maybe a quick 10, 15 seconds from each of us if you want to shout anything out in terms of your socials or where to go to learn more information for your products. We can do that really quickly. Adam, starting with you.
I just wanted to say that we are also working tutorials and just education materials for the community. And it is very important to just educate people on how easy it is to use this stack because they hear all the rumors about, oh yeah, Web3 is bad for gaming. It's actually not. It's not harder to make Web3 games, it's easier. And you just have to try it to find out about it yourself.
Mine's going to be super easy. You can go to near.org We have a ton of blogs. We have a lovely four-part blog on gaming, as well as sustainability and some of our other great initiatives that are happening across the foundation and across the protocol. You can also obviously check us out on Twitter and all of the socials, also on YouTube as well. If you go to Near Protocol, you'll find a ton of videos around Near explainers with thought leaders and other people as well within the Web3 space. So thanks for the time.
Yeah, and for us, our URL is web3.storage, so that's the domain. And you can also reach out to me directly at david@dag.house, dag.house, / just find me around the next few days. I'll be here and would especially be excited to talk to you if you're looking to offload IPFS infrastructure that you're running yourself and just be able to interact with an API instead of having to do that. And check out our blog too at blog.web3.storage, and that represents the latest and greatest of what we're up to. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.